I remember the moment when the firing started. Bullets were snapping over my head, and every time I even thought about standing up, someone let off another shot. I just stayed down in the dirt, not knowing how long it all lasted. Time did not seem real in moments like that. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went completely quiet. Out of that silence, I heard a voice call out, "Hey boy, get up. Come over here." I lifted my head and saw 3 American soldiers standing right in front of me, their rifles pointed straight at me. Before I go on, I should mention that this story is shared thanks to people who donate through things like Patreon or our website. Their support helps keep these memories alive. Now, back to my account. Long before all this, Germany had already lived through one terrible defeat in the First World War. An Austrian-born politician named Adolf Hitler used that anger and turmoil to climb into power, and by 1933 the National Socialist Party had taken complete control. He promised to restore Germany's pride, and folks like me, Wolfram Forster, grew up in a nation being reshaped for another war. My father had served in the First World War, and the things he told me were gruesome. Horrible scenes. When the National Socialists started another war, I could not connect it with the nightmare he had described. I still remember the very day the Second World War began, the radio was playing, and there was Hitler's voice saying that Polish forces had attacked a German radio station. He talked about gunfire, and how Germany was now firing back. Of course, that so-called Polish attack was nothing but a staged excuse to invade Poland. Hitler wanted more land. He wanted domination. France and Britain had been watching him for a long time, and they warned him plainly, "If you invade Poland, we will declare war on Germany." He ignored them, and that was the spark that officially set off the Second World War. Life inside Germany grew darker as the war went on. Night after night we endured bombing raids. At night it was the British. During the day, the Americans came. You were expected to show absolute loyalty to Hitler, no matter what you thought. I remember a dentist in our town who made an offhand comment about how things were going. He mentioned how our troops were pulling back, how another city seemed to burn every night from the bombings. It was not even said loudly, but one woman gave him a sharp look. He realized he might have said too much. He tried to brush it off by praising Hitler, saying our leader would save us. But it was too late, she reported him to the secret police. He was taken to court. A schoolmate and I slipped out of one of our lessons at medical school to watch the trial. The dentist was charged with sabotaging the war effort and spreading defeatism. The judge declared him guilty. The sentence was death. My friend and I just sat there in disbelief. That man was going to die over a few honest words. I have never forgotten that moment. In those days, one wrong sentence could end your life. Then in November of 1944, my own draft notice arrived. I was ordered into the army. By that time, Hitler's dream of conquering the world was collapsing. Our attempt to take over Russia had turned into a disaster. In the West, the British and Americans kept pushing us back, freeing country after country. That was when Hitler came up with one last desperate idea to try to turn the war around. Right before Christmas, our company commander asked for anyone who could sing. He wanted a small group to rehearse Christmas songs for a celebration. But before we ever finished practicing, word came down, "Stop everything." The celebration was cancelled because the German army had just launched a new offensive in the Ardennes. That operation became known as the Battle of the Bulge. At first, it slowed down the advancing Allied forces. But the winter cold was brutal, and the fighting was savage. The battle dragged on for more than a month. Eventually the Allies brought in more troops and supplies, and our forces began to run thin. My own time in combat did not last long. I started feeling a terrible pain in my neck, and by the next day I had a fever and chills. I could barely stand, let alone fight. I received permission to leave the front, and when I reached a young doctor, he told me the next train heading west would take me toward Hamburg. someone on board would send me on to a hospital. By then, the German front lines had been pushed deep into our own territory. While I was trying to recover, the thought hung over me like a weight: once I was well again, where would they send me? Back to the west to face the Americans? Or to the east, where the Russians showed no mercy at all to prisoners? When I was finally well enough to travel, I had to report to the German commandant in Berlin. The question hanging over me was simple but terrifying: would they send me back to the Western Front, or send me east? Everyone knew what the Eastern Front meant. If they sent me there, chances were I would never return. Thankfully, they ordered me westward. I was assigned to a small town called Salzwedel. I checked in for duty on the 10th of April, 1945. Our orders were to block the main road leading from the Western Front into Salzwedel. The idea was to buy the town enough time to move as many hospital patients and civilians out as possible. Soon after we reached our position, the firing began. The one thing I remember most clearly is that I simply could not stand up. Every time I tried to lift myself, shots kicked up dirt and rocks around my helmet. Even raising my head to see where I was brought more gunfire. The stones hitting my helmet told me enough, so I dug myself deeper into the ground, trying to keep my head from sticking up at all. I have no idea how long that went on. At some point, everything went silent. I lay there waiting, unsure if I should risk lifting my head. Then suddenly I heard a voice: "Hey boy, get up. Come over here." I looked up, and 3 American soldiers were standing right in front of me with their rifles pointed my way. What else could I do? I stood up slowly and raised my hands. And I mean this honestly, I am not trying to dress the story up. In that moment I knew deep inside that I had survived. For me, the war had ended right there. The next morning brought another unforgettable moment: the steady, thunderous drone of airplanes. Hundreds of them. Boeing B-17 flying fortresses and consolidated B-24 Liberators flying in formation toward Berlin. All day long, the Americans marched us westward. Whenever we passed through a German village, the guards stopped and let the local people come out to give us something: a piece of bread, a cigarette, anything they had. They treated us kindly, which was something I did not expect. Eventually we were brought to a huge open field: no trees, no bushes, no buildings. Just open land. They told us to start digging holes. One day we heard the guards firing rifles outside the camp. For a moment we thought the worst. But then came the shout, growing louder and louder: "It is over. It is over. The war is over. Germany has surrendered." By late April 1945, the Allies had completely broken what was left of Nazi Germany. Soviet forces were right at the doorstep of Hitler's bunker. Cornered and defeated, Adolf Hitler took his own life. After 6 long years, the war in Europe had finally ended. All that remained for me was to somehow make my way back home. My father had an old friend from the First World War who lived in the mountains near Wiesbaden. Long before the war ended, they had agreed, if either of them survived and did not know what had happened to the other, that place would be the meeting point. One day, about a month after the surrender, that friend returned. He reached into his pocket and handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter from my mother. In 1946, I was finally reunited with my family. Life after war did not return all at once, it came back slowly, piece by piece. By the late 1950s, my childhood dream finally came true: I moved to the United States. I became a doctor and even served in the United States Army, eventually reaching the rank of colonel. But even today, certain things bring those old memories flooding back. When I watch the news and see bombed-out houses, broken towns, and helpless people running for their lives, it hits me hard. I lived through scenes just like that. Seeing them again on television brings back memories I would rather forget. It makes the daily news feel heavy.